This lesson explores learning outcome 1, listening and speaking, and addresses the assessment standard to demonstrate the skills of listening to and delivering oral presentations. Learners should be able to demonstrate comprehension of oral texts by recording main and/or supporting ideas by making notes, checklists, summaries, paraphrases, and/or by retelling and explaining. Hi there. In our last lesson, we had a general introduction to humour. We learned that humour is a very personal matter, that people have different tastes when it comes to humour, and that a range of factors influence what people find funny. In this lesson, we're going to look at some of the techniques that are used to create humour. We'll also look at some types of humour or genres that we are likely to encounter. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to define the terms, devices, genres, and conventions. Recognize devices used to create humour in some genres. Wow, that sounds like a lot for us to do in this lesson, so let's get started. The first thing to realize is that humour is a way to express ourselves. Humour can be used in poetry, speeches, and creative writing. It's used in cartoons, magazine articles, and advertisements. Some people can tell a story and others will find it very funny, whereas someone else's story doesn't even get a giggle. The reason why we find some people's ways of expressing themselves funnier than others is because they're more successful at using humorous techniques. Another way to talk about these techniques is to call them devices. A device is a way of using language to create a particular effect. I think that this definition needs a bit more explanation. Let's look at a device that I know you'll be familiar with. The simile. We have studied similes before in literature like poetry. Can you think of an example? Here's one. The water was as cold as ice. In a simile, two things are being compared. In the example we've just looked at, a simile is used to make a description of cold water more interesting. In other words, the simile is a device that uses language to create a comparison between two things. Now, we also use similes to make descriptions more humorous. For example, if we wanted to tell a funny story about someone who got a surprise, we could say, his eyes were as big as saucers. In this case, the device we are using to express a humorous idea is the simile. It paints a mental picture in my head that looks like this. This is the picture that the simile makes in my mind. Without the language device, it wouldn't be quite as funny. So that is the simile. Another device that you will remember from other English lessons is the metaphor. The metaphor is a device that is also used to make comparisons between two things, in the same way as the simile does. However, the metaphor doesn't use the words as and like. Here's a metaphor that can be used to create humour. I got such a fright that my legs turned to jelly. What kind of an image does this language device create? Think about how you would walk if your legs were turned to jelly. The simile and the metaphor are just two devices that can be used to express something in a funny way. In these lessons, you'll be introduced to more of these devices, including exaggeration, satire, stereotyping, puns, spoonerisms, parody, caricature, and irony. We'll explain all of these terms in much more detail, so keep watching closely. These are the devices that we can use to create humor. Think of them as some of the ingredients in humor. In the same way that flour, sugar, eggs, and chocolate can all be combined to make a delicious cake, you can create a humorous effect with similes, metaphors, puns, and exaggeration. Different situations and styles will use different devices, but there will usually be at least one of these humorous devices in things that we find funny. Now let's move on to the next term you need to know. Genre. There are different ways that humor is used. For example, we find humor in cartoons, stand-up comedy, jokes, funny scenes from movies, and adverts. These different styles can also be called genres. You might have heard the term genre before, but here's a definition. Genres are the different categories in a group that have similar characteristics, styles, and conventions. Movies are divided into genres like action, horror, romantic comedies, and thrillers. Music is divided into genres like rock, rap, kwaito, jazz, and gospel. When we talk about the conventions of a genre, what we mean is the rules that examples from that genre follow. Think about the genre of music, kwaito. What are the common characteristics that all examples from the genre share? Here's what we came up with. Kwaito music is made by South African musicians. The beat is fast and it's good to dance to. It's our own special version of hip-hop and rap sounds. The words are often about living in South Africa. It has a township vibe and style. These characteristics can also be called conventions. As I mentioned earlier, horror movies are a genre of film. Now take a moment to think about the characteristics or conventions of horror movies. Can you come up with a list of 3 or 4 characteristics? Let's hear what some learners had to say about horror movies.
A characteristic, I think, in horror movies is that it always ends in too much blood, or there's zombies or people who act totally insane.
One thing I've noticed is that they always use the same kind of music. It's always like scary music.
Well, one characteristic I find repeatedly in all horror movies is how they love to keep you in suspense. And I'm one of those viewers who loves to sit at the edge of my seat because I love to know what's coming up, and suspense is always one of the biggest contributing factors in any horror movie.
One characteristic that you always find in a horror movie is that the bad guy is always schizophrenic or mentally unstable.
One characteristic of a horror movie is that people are either really brave or really stupid because they always take the wrong turns, they always do the wrong things, and you can basically predict most of the things that are going to happen.
Well, it's not so much a characteristic as the concept they always use. Why do they go upstairs? We all know if they go upstairs and the downstairs door is locked, he's coming for you. So yeah, that's one cliched one that they always use.
And just like different types of music have different conventions, we also have conventions and characteristics of different styles of humor. We interviewed some people who use humor in their work every day to find out what they think makes people laugh. First up, let's hear from Mark Lottering about what conventions he uses when doing stand-up comedy, which is a genre of humor.
If you want to get people to laugh, I think it's very important to send yourself up in first and foremost. If people know that you are not taking yourself too seriously, you're more than halfway there. I've often found, and most of my stories, when I start with the audience, I start with sending myself up, and audiences just love that. And if you're prepared to do that, and you're prepared to make a fool of yourself, not take yourself too seriously, that's when people respond really well with laughter.
So, a convention that Mark uses to make his stand-up comedy work is making fun of himself. The next genre we're looking at is the cartoon. We went to talk to Stephen Francis, one of the creators of the Madam and Eve cartoons, about what conventions they use to create their form of humour.
Hi, I'm Stephen Francis, and I'm one of the writing team of Stephen Francis and Rico, who create the popular Madam and Eve cartoon strip. How do we do a Madam and Eve cartoon? Well, we read the newspapers, we listen to the radio, because we like to put inside the Madam and Eve cartoon what's going on in South Africa today. What are the news headlines? What is everybody talking about? What's on people's minds? We try to put this in the cartoon and make it funny, which is a big challenge.
So, one of the conventions of the Madam and Eve cartoons is that they use current events as the basis of their jokes. When we spoke to Mark Lottering and Stephen Francis, they also mentioned some other techniques that they use to get people laughing, including parody, exaggeration, stereotyping, and irony. We'll look at all these terms in more detail during the following lessons in this series. But before we end today's lesson, let's review the main things that we learned. We can create humor by using different techniques. These are also called devices. Humor can be put into different categories or styles. These are called genres. And different genres will have special conventions or characteristics. But even though there are different styles or genres, they will all use one or more of the devices to create the humor. Here's your task for today. We're going to play a clip from Mark Lottering's DVD. As you watch it, look for 2 examples of similes.
I must go, man. My airtime's disappearing like a whitey in Generations. Okay, cool. Check you later. Looking cooler than Tony Braxton in a Channel O video.
I hope you were able to spot the similes. Your task now is to write down 2 similes from the clip, explain how they help to create humor, what references people need to understand to catch the joke. In case you didn't spot the similes the first time round, here's the clip again.
I must go, man. My airtime's disappearing like a whitey in Generations. Okay, cool. Check you later. Looking cooler than Tony Braxton in a Channel O video.
We've come to the end of the lesson. Till next time, goodbye.